Chapter 1. The Invitation to Hertford House. The fog clung to London like a jealous lover, wrapping the streets in a damp grey shroud. In his modest yet impeccably ordered apartment at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sipped his tisane, his small fastidious hands cradling the porcelain cup. The Morning Post lay before him, neatly slit open by his devoted valet George, but it was a single envelope, cream, heavy, embossed with the crest of the Wallace collection, that arrested his attention. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his green eyes narrowing as he read the letter. It is not every day that one receives a summons from Sir Reginald Wallace himself, and yet the tone, it is most curious. None. The letter, penned in a precise hand, requested Poirot's presence at Hertford House, the grand home of the Wallace collection, that very afternoon. Sir Reginald, the museum's director, hinted at a matter of utmost delicacy, involving a priceless artifact. No further details were provided, save for an urgent plea for discretion. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sure sign that his little grey cells were already stirring. "George," Poirot called, setting the letter down with a flourish. His valet appeared, ever the picture of quiet efficiency. "Prepare my best suit, the charcoal with the silver pinstripe, and my stick, the one with the ivory handle. I must be impeccable for such an occasion." "Very good, sir," George replied, a faint smile betraying his amusement at Poirot's sartorial precision. "Might I inquire, sir, if this is a case of some import?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is perhaps the beginning of a puzzle, my good George, and Hercule Poirot does not resist a puzzle." By 3 o'clock, Poirot stood before Hertford House, its Palladian facade looming through the fog. The Wallace collection, a treasure trove of art and antiquities, was a jewel in London's cultural crown, its galleries filled with paintings by Titian, furniture from Versailles, and artifacts of untold value. Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat and ascended the steps, his polished shoes clicking with purpose. Inside, the air was warm, scented with beeswax and old wealth. A young footman ushered Poirot through marble halls to a private office where Sir Reginald Wallace awaited. The director was a tall, angular man in his 50s, with a patrician nose and eyes that darted nervously. His tweed suit, though fine, seemed ill at ease on his frame, as if he bore an invisible weight. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough for coming," Sir Reginald began, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. He gestured to a leather armchair, but Poirot remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "It is my pleasure, Sir Reginald," Poirot replied, his accent precise, his tone warm yet probing. "But you must tell me, pourquoi this urgency? Your letter, it speaks of delicacy, yet it reveals so little." Hercule Poirot does not work in the shadows. None. Sir Reginald hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting eavesdroppers. "It concerns the Emerald Chalice," he said at last, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A relic in our collection, Sienese, 15th century, encrusted with emeralds. It is unique, and it is in danger." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Danger, you say? Of what nature?" "Theft," Sir Reginald said bluntly. 3 days ago, I received a note, unsigned, slipped under this very door. It warned that the chalice would be taken unless certain center demands were met. No demands were specified, only a promise of further instructions." Poirot's moustache quivered. Interessant. "And this note, you have it still?" Sir Reginald produced a folded paper from his desk, handling it as if it were a live serpent. Poirot donned his pince-nez and examined it. The handwriting was elegant, almost calligraphic, yet the words were chilling. The chalice will be claimed, complet, or the Wallace legacy falls. No signature, no crest, Poirot mused, his fingers tracing the paper sift's edge. And yet the author is educated, precise. This is not the work of a common thief. "There's said more," Sir Reginald said, his face paling. "Yesterday, a second note arrived. It mentioned a gala we stir hosting tomorrow night, a grand affair for our patrons. The note suggested something would happen then." Poirot Sit's eyes sparkled with the thrill of the chase. "A gala, you say? Parfait! It is in such gatherings that the masks of men slip. Tell me, Sir Reginald, who among your staff, your patrons, might wish harm to the collection?" Sir Reginald bristled. "My staff are loyal, Monsieur Poirot. As for our patrons, they are the cream of society, lords, ladies, philanthropists. To suspect them would be absurd." "Absurder?" Poirot smiled faintly. "The human heart, Sir Reginald, is never absurd, only complex. I shall attend this gala, and I shall observe. But first, I must see this Emerald Chalice." Sir Reginald nodded, rising. "Follow me, Monsieur Poirot. But I warn you, the chalice has a history. Some say it is cursed." Poirot chuckled softly, his cane tapping as he followed. "Curses, Sir Reginald, are for those who lack the little grey cells. Hercule Poirot fears only one thing: a mystery unsolved." As they left the office, the fog outside seemed to press closer to the windows, as if the very air sensed the conspiracy brewing within Hertford House. Chapter 2. The Emerald Chalice. The galleries of Hertford House were a symphony of opulence, their walls adorned with masterpieces that whispered of distant centuries. Hercule Poirot followed Sir Reginald Wallace through a labyrinth of polished floors and gilded frames, his keen eyes darting from a Watteau painting to a suit of Medici armour, each object a testament to the Wallace collection's grandeur. Yet it was toward a small, dimly lit chamber that Sir Reginald led him, a room reserved for the museum's most enigmatic treasure. "Here it is," Sir Reginald said, pausing before a velvet-draped pedestal. He drew back a curtain, revealing a glass case that gleamed under a single chandelier. Within rested the Emerald Chalice, a relic of breathtaking artistry. Crafted in Siena during the 15th century, its silver body was etched with delicate vines, its rim studded with emeralds that caught the light like frozen stars. The chalice seemed to pulse with secrets, its beauty both inviting and forbidding. "Magnifique," Poirot murmured, leaning closer, his pince-nez glinting. "But tell me, Sir Reginald, what is this history you speak of? This curse?" Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "It's a tale from the Renaissance, Monsieur Poirot. The chalice was commissioned by the House of Visconti, a gift to seal a betrothal. But the bride, a lady of the Sforza family, died under mysterious circumstances days after drinking from it. The chalice vanished, only to resurface in England a century ago, donated to the collection by an anonymous benefactor. Some say it brings ruin to those who covet it." Poirot Sit's moustache twitched with amusement. "Mon ami, a chalice does not kill. It is the hand that wields it. None. But this anonymous benefactor, most curious. You have no record?" "None," Sir Reginald admitted. "The donation was shrouded in secrecy, even from my predecessors." As Poirot studied the chalice, a soft footfall broke the silence. A woman approached, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald green dress echoing the chalice's jewels. She was in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to weigh Poirot in an instant. "Sir Reginald, you didn't tell me we had a guest," she said, her voice smooth but with a hint of steel, and inspecting the chalice no less. Sir Reginald flushed. "Monsieur Poirot, allow me to introduce Miss Eleanor Vance, our chief curator. She oversees the collection sex artifacts." "Enchantée, Mademoiselle Vance," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "Hercule Poirot, at your service. You are, I presume, well acquainted with this chalice." Miss Vance's lips curved into a guarded smile. "Intimately. It sits the jewel of our collection, though its history is troublesome. I trust Sir Reginald has shared the recent unpleasantness." "The notes, you mean?" Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes were piercing. "You have seen them, mademoiselle?" "I have," she replied, her gaze steady. "They stir theatrical. If you ask me, likely some prankster with a grudge against the collection." "Peut-être," Poirot said, tilting his head, "but a prankster who knows the chalice sister's value and chooses their words with care. That is no ordinary jest." Before Miss Vance could respond, a new figure bustled into the room, a wiry man in a tweed jacket, his spectacles slipping down his nose. His hands fluttered nervously as he spoke. "Sir Reginald, the preparations for tomorrow's SIP's gala are behind schedule. The caterers are insisting on—" "Not now, Mr. Finch," Sir Reginald snapped, then softened. "Monsieur Poirot, this is Mr. Harold Finch, our archivist. He sits indispensable, if a touch excitable." Finch blinked at Poirot, adjusting his spectacles. "Poirot, the detective. Oh dear me, are we in some sort of trouble?" "Trouble, Monsieur Finch," Poirot said, his voice velvet. "That remains to be seen. Tell me, you work closely with the Chalice Sits records, n'est-ce pas? Have you noticed anything unusual?" Finch fidgeted, his eyes darting to the chalice. "Well, I did find an old inventory note last week, tucked in a ledger from 1890. It mentioned the chalice, but it was odd. It referred to a sea guardian Sit who watches it. I thought it nonsense, of course." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "A guardian. Kit trays interessen. And this note, you have it?" "It sticks in the archives," Finch stammered. "I can fetch it if you stucked, like." "Oui. I would like that very much," Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. As Finch scurried off, Poirot turned back to the chalice, his little grey cells humming. The cryptic notes, the chalice's dark history, and now this talk of a guardian. It was a tapestry of intrigue, and Poirot was determined to unravel it. But Miss Vance's cool demeanour and Finch's nervous energy lingered in his mind. Each, he suspected, held a piece of the puzzle. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said, straightening, "I shall return tomorrow for this gala of yours. It will be, I think, most illuminating. But for now, I must reflect. The chalice, it speaks, but only to those who listen." As he left the chamber, the emeralds seemed to wink in the shadows, as if guarding their secrets for just one more night. Chapter 3. The Suspicious Curators. The morning sun pierced the fog, casting a golden glow through the tall windows of Hertford House. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his charcoal suit, stood in the Wallace collection's main gallery, his cane resting lightly in one hand. Sir Reginald Wallace had insisted on introducing the rest of the museum staff before the gala that evening, and Poirot, ever methodical, was eager to observe these new players in what he sensed was a most intricate game. "Mes amis," Poirot said to himself, his eyes sweeping the room, "the human heart reveals itself in the smallest gestures. Hercule Poirot shall watch, and he shall see." Sir Reginald appeared, flanked by two figures. The first was a stout woman in her 40s, her grey hair pulled into a severe bun, her tweed skirt and blouse as practical as her demeanour. The second was a young man, lanky and pale, with a nervous habit of tugging at his cufflinks. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald began, "may I present Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, our head of restoration, and Mr. Lionel Drake, our assistant curator. They are the backbone of the collection." Mrs. Pritchard stood, lips pursed, as she gave Poirot a curt nod. "A detective, is it? I hope you stir not here to make trouble, Mr. Poirot. We sep enough to do keeping these artifacts pristine." "Trouble, madam." Poirot's smile was disarming. "None, none. I seek only clarity. Tell me, you work closely with this Emerald Chalice, have you noticed anything out of place?" Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. "The chalice is flawless, as always. I polished it myself last week. If someone's planning to steal it, they'll have to get past me first." Her tone carried a fierce pride, but Poirot noted the way her fingers tightened on her clipboard. "And you, Monsieur Drake?" Poirot turned to the young man, who flinched as if caught in a spotlight. "You assist Mademoiselle Vance, I presume? A position of great responsibility." Drake's Adam's apple bobbed. "Why, yes, sir. I help catalogue the exhibits. The chalice, it's extraordinary. But I don't touch it much. Miss Vance says it's too delicate." He tugged at his cufflink again, a gold one etched with a tiny crest. Poirot's gaze lingered on the cufflink. "Charmant. A family heirloom, perhaps?" Drake flushed. "Oh, just a trinket. My father was particular about appearances." Before Poirot could press further, Miss Eleanor Vance entered, her green eyes scanning the group. "Sir Reginald, the florists have arrived for the gala. Shall I oversee them?" "Yes, yes, do," Sir Reginald said, distractedly. "Monsieur Poirot, you forgive the chaos. A gala of this scale requires precision." "Precision is my delight," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. "But tell me, Mademoiselle Vance, do all your staff share your composure under such pressure?" Eleanor Sixth's smile was tight. "Most do, though Mr. Finch tends to fret, and Mrs. Pritchard can be territorial. As for Lionel, he seeks his eager but green, yet observant perhaps," Poirot said lightly, watching Drake shift uncomfortably. At that moment, Mr. Harold Finch burst in, clutching a tattered ledger. "Monsieur Poirot, I found it, the note about the chalice's guardian." He thrust the paper forward, his hands trembling. Poirot took it, his eyes scanning the faded ink. "Hod's the note, dated 1890. Read, the chalice is watched by its guardian, bound by blood to its secret. No signature, only a wax seal with a faint impression of a rose." "Clous sits de curieux," Poirot murmured. "A guardian bound by blood, and this seal, most distinctive. Clous, Monsieur Finch. Where was this ledger kept?" "In the basement archives," Finch said, wiping his brow. "It was buried in a box of old donor records. I only found it because I was cross-referencing for the gala inventory." Mrs. Pritchard snorted. Old nonsense. That's what it is. This museum doesn't need ghost stories to protect its treasures. Perhaps not, Poirot said, folding the note carefully. But stories, madam, often hide truths, and Hercule Poirot is most interested in truths. As the group dispersed to their duties, Poirot lingered, his mind alight. Mrs. Pritchard's defensiveness, Drake's nervous tick, Finch's discovery, and Eleanor's cool control. Each was a thread in the tapestry of the conspiracy. The gala, he knew, would be the stage where these threads would begin to unravel. Chapter 4. A Gala Under Tension. The grand hall of Hertford House shimmered under the glow of a dozen chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering light across the polished marble floors. The Wallace Collection's gala was a spectacle of London's elite, a glittering assembly of lords, ladies and magnates, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes and the soft strains of a string quartet. Yet beneath the opulence, an undercurrent of unease pulsed, as if the very air sensed the shadow cast by the Emerald Chalice. Hercule Poirot stood near a Titian masterpiece, his charcoal suit immaculate, his moustache perfectly symmetrical, his green eyes, sharp as a falcon's, scanned the crowd, noting every glance, every gesture. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend, stood beside him, looking slightly out of place in his borrowed dinner jacket, but brimming with enthusiasm. "By Jove, Poirot," Hastings whispered, sipping his champagne, "what a turnout! Half of Mayfair must be here. Do you really think a thief would dare make a move in this crowd?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Monsieur Hastings, it is precisely in such a crowd that a thief thrives. The chaos of gaiety. It is the perfect mask. But rest assured, Poirot observes all." Sir Reginald Wallace moved through the throng, his angular frame tense despite his polished smile. He paused to greet a stout, florid-faced man in his 60s, whose gold watch chain gleamed against his waistcoat. "Lord Bartholomew Cresswell," Sir Reginald said, guiding the man toward Poirot, "our most generous patron. Lord Cresswell, this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the detective I mentioned." Lord Cresswell's bushy eyebrows rose as he appraised Poirot. "A detective, eh? Bit out of place among all this finery, aren't you? No offence, of course. Reginald says you stes here about some nonsense with the chalice." "Nonsense, my lord." Poirot's tone was velvet, his eyes piercing. "A threat to a treasure such as the Emerald Chalice is never nonsense. Tell me, you are a great admirer of the collection. Perhaps you know its history." Cresswell puffed out his chest. "Know it, I funded half the acquisitions here. The chalice is a beauty, no doubt, but all this talk of curses and guardians poppycock. Still, I hate to see it pinched. Bad for the museum set's reputation, you know." "Precisement," Poirot murmured, noting the man's quick dismissal of the curse. "And you have seen nothing unusual tonight, my lord?" "Not a thing," Cresswell said, though his eyes flicked toward the far end of the hall, where Miss Eleanor Vance stood in her emerald gown, conversing with a tall, dark-haired woman in a sapphire-blue dress. Poirot followed his gaze, his curiosity piqued. The woman in blue was Lady Beatrice Harrow, a widow of considerable wealth and influence, known for her sharp wit and sharper tongue. As Poirot and Hastings approached, Eleanor introduced her. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, this is Lady Harrow, one of our most devoted supporters." Lady Harrow extended a gloved hand, her smile both charming and calculating. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I trust you sit here to ensure our gala remains uneventful. Uneventful, madame. Poirot bowed over her hand. I fear that is not the way of Hercule Poirot. I am here to uncover truths, and truths, they are rarely uneventful. Lady Harrow laughed, a low, musical sound. Well said. But surely you don't believe these silly threats about the chalice. It's just someone stirring trouble. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone light, but his eyes watchful. Yet trouble. It has a way of revealing itself at such gatherings. You have attended many such events here, non? Oh, dozens, Lady Harrow replied, her gaze drifting to the glass case where the chalice gleamed, now surrounded by velvet ropes and 2 uniformed guards. The collection is my passion. Though I confess, the chalice's history fascinates me most. Such tragedy, such mystery. Before Poirot could probe further, a commotion erupted near the case. Mr. Harold Finch, the nervous archivist, was gesturing wildly, his spectacles nearly falling off. Sir Reginald, the case, it's been tampered with. The crowd parted as Sir Reginald and Poirot hastened over, Hastings trailing behind. The glass case housing the chalice was intact, but a faint scratch marked its lock, as if someone had tested it with a tool. The chalice itself remained untouched, its emeralds winking mockingly. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, kneeling to inspect the scratch. "This is no accident. The hand that made this mark was skilled, but impatient." Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, the head of restoration, pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with indignation. "This is outrageous. I checked that case myself this morning. Whoever did this must have done it during the gala." "Calm yourself, Mrs. Pritchard," Sir Reginald said, though his own hands trembled. "Monsieur Poirot, what does this mean?" "It means," Poirot said, rising, "that the author of the notes is here among us, and they are bold to act under so many eyes." Young Lionel Drake hovered nearby, his cufflinks glinting as he wrung his hands. "It's dreadful, sir. Could it be one of the guests, or someone on staff?" Poirot's gaze swept over Drake, then to Eleanor, who stood composed but pale. "Tout as possible, Monsieur Drake, but Hercule Poirot does not guess. He observes, and tonight I have observed much." As the quartet resumed playing, restoring a veneer of normalcy, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, did you notice Lord Cresswell's sift's glance toward Lady Harrow, and the way Mademoiselle Vance watched the chalice, as if it were more than an artifact to her?" Hastings frowned. "You think they are involved, but they are pillars of society." "Pillars, Hastings, can hide cracks," Poirot said, his voice low. "And then there is Monsieur Finch, so quick to find that scratch, and Madame Pritchard, so protective. Each plays a part in this drama, but the script, it is not yet clear." As the gala continued, Poirot positioned himself near a Fragonard painting, his eyes never straying far from the chalice. The scratch on the case was a warning, a taunt from a mind as cunning as his own. The night was young, and the conspiracy, he knew, was only beginning to unfold. Chapter 5. The First Disappearance. The morning after the gala, Hertford House was cloaked in an uneasy calm, as if the very walls held their breath. The fog had lifted, revealing a crisp London sky, but within the Wallace collection, a storm was brewing. Hercule Poirot sat in Sir Reginald Wallace's office, his hands folded neatly over his cane, his green eyes fixed on the director's ashen face. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his brow furrowed, still reeling from the previous night's discovery of the scratched lock on the Emerald Chalice's case. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald began, his voice strained. "It is worse than we feared. Another artifact is missing. A small ivory statuette, a 16th century Madonna from the East Gallery. It was there yesterday morning. I sipped certain of it." Poirot stakes, mustache twitched, a sign of his little grey cells at work. "Stakes the grave, Sir Reginald. A scratch on a case is one thing, a theft another, entirely. Tell me this statuette, its value, its significance." Sir Reginald sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "It sets valuable, certainly, but not like the chalice. It sets a fine piece, Italian, worth perhaps a few £100. But its loss, it suggests the thief is testing us, doesn't set it. Or worse, that they set among us." "Précisément," Poirot said, his tone calm but sharp. "An inside job. It is possible. Who had access to the East Gallery yesterday?" "Only the staff, sir," Reginald replied. "Miss Vance, Mrs. Pritchard, Mr. Finch, and young Drake. The guards were stationed at the Chalice's case all evening, and the East Gallery was locked during the gala." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the names, "and the statuette, it was not displayed prominently." "No, it was in a side case, easily overlooked," Sir Reginald said. "That sits what makes this so perplexing. Why steal something so inconsequential?" "Inconsequential?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Nothing is inconsequential, Sir Reginald. A thief chooses their prize with purpose. I must see this East Gallery." The East Gallery was a quieter space than the Grand Hall, its walls lined with sombre portraits and delicate sculptures. The empty case stood in a corner, its glass unmarred, but its velvet cushion bare. Poirot examined it closely, his pince-nez perched on his nose, noting the absence of dust or fingerprints. "Curieux," he murmured. "The lock is untouched, yet the statuette is gone. This was no clumsy theft. Hastings, it was precise, deliberate." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, scratched his head. "But why take a statuette when the chalice is the real prize? It doesn't add up, Poirot." "Au contraire, my friend," Poirot said, straightening. "It adds up perfectly to someone who wishes to distract, or perhaps to send a message." As they returned to the main hall, Miss Eleanor Vance approached, her emerald gown replaced by a severe black dress, her expression taut. "Monsieur Poirot, Sir Reginald told me about the statuette. This is outrageous. I inspected that gallery myself yesterday. Everything was in order." "Vraiment?" Poirot's tone was gentle, but his gaze was piercing. "And you saw nothing amiss, mademoiselle? No one lingering where they should not?" Eleanor hesitated, her fingers brushing a silver locket at her throat. "Well, I did see Mr. Drake near the East Gallery yesterday afternoon. He said he was checking the labels, but he seemed distracted." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Distrait, you say? Most interesting. And you, mademoiselle, you have a particular attachment to the collection. None, perhaps, to the chalice." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "I care for all our artifacts, Monsieur Poirot. The chalice is special, yes, but only because of its history. I sits no thief, if that sits what you sits implying." "More imply." Poirot's smile was disarming. "I merely seek to understand, mademoiselle." Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Agnes Pritchard stormed in, her face a thundercloud. "This is a disgrace. First the chalice is threatened, now my restorations are being pilfered. I step half a mind to lock the galleries myself. Calm yourself, Mrs. Pritchard, Sir Reginald said, his voice weary. Monsieur Poirot is here to help. Help? Mrs. Pritchard snorted. He sits poking about while our treasures vanish. I saw that Finch fellow sniffing around the East Gallery yesterday too, always fussing with his ledgers. If you ask me, he sits up to something. Poirot turned to her, his expression unreadable. Madame Pritchard, your vigilance is admirable. But tell me, you were in the East Gallery yesterday as well. We? Restoring, perhaps? Mrs. Pritchard bristled. I was cleaning a frame. Yes, but I didn't touch that statuette. My work is with brushes and varnish, not thieving. Bien sûr, Poirot said smoothly. And yet the thief moves among us, unseen. I must speak with Monsieur Finch and Monsieur Drake. Harold Finch was summoned first, his spectacles fogging with nervous sweat as he clutched his ever-present ledger. I was in the East Gallery briefly, Monsieur Poirot, to update the inventory. But I swear the statuette was there when I left. And you saw no one else? Poirot pressed, his voice soft but insistent. Finch hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. Well, I did see Lady Harrow near the gallery before the gala. She was admiring the portraits, or so she said, but she sits a patron, not a thief. Poirot's moustache quivered. Admiring, you say? Que c'est très intéressant. And Monsieur Drake? Lion Drake appeared moments later, his lanky frame hunched, his cufflinks glinting as he fidgeted. I was only checking labels. As Miss Vance said, he stammered. I didn't take anything. Why would I risk my position here? Why, indeed, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. Yet you were in the gallery, Monsieur Drake, and now an artifact is gone. Tell me these cufflinks of yours, they are most distinctive. A family crest, perhaps? Drake paled, his hand covering the cufflink. They sitter just a gift from my father. Nothing special. Rien de spécial? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. We shall see. As the staff dispersed, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, the net tightens. The statuette's theft is no accident. It is a step in a larger dance. Eleanor's hesitation, Pritchard's indignation, Finch's nerves, Drake's secrecy, each tells a story. And then there is Lady Harrow, lingering where she should not. Hastings frowned. But Poirot, what sits the point of stealing a statuette?
It starts not the chalice.
Exactment, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. It is not the chalice yet, but it is a signal, Hastings, a move in a game we do not yet fully understand. Tonight, we must watch the chalice closely, for I fear the thief grows bold. As they left the gallery, the empty case seemed to mock them, a silent challenge from a thief who danced just beyond Poirot's grasp. Chapter 6. Captain Hastings' Septon Observation. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Hertford House, casting long shadows across the marble floors of the Wallace collection. Hercule Poirot stood in the East Gallery, his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes fixed on the empty case where the ivory statuette had once rested. The theft had sent ripples of unease through the museum staff, and Poirot, ever methodical, was piecing together the puzzle with his little grey cells. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fidgeted, his honest face clouded with frustration. I say, Poirot, Hastings said, adjusting his tie, this business with the statuette is dashed peculiar. Why take such a trifle when the chalice is the real prize? It's us almost as if the thief is toying with us. Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. Mon cher Hastings, you are not wrong. The thief, they play a game, but it is not without purpose. The statuette's disappearance is a distraction, perhaps, or a test. But come, let us walk the galleries. Sometimes the eyes of a friend see what even Poirot may overlook. Grateful for the task, Hastings followed Poirot through the labyrinth of rooms, past gilded frames and gleaming artifacts. The museum was quieter now, the gala's bustle replaced by an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant clatter of Mrs. Pritchard's restoration tools. As they entered the armor gallery, a cavernous space filled with polished suits of mail and ornate swords, Hastings paused near a display of 17th century daggers. "Hold on, Poirot," Hastings said, squinting at the case. "That sept's odd. Look here, this dagger, the one with the sapphire hilt. I could swear it was positioned differently yesterday. The blade was pointing left, not right." Poirot's head snapped toward the case, his eyes narrowing. "Vraiment, Hastings? You are certain?" He stepped closer, his pince-nez glinting as he examined the dagger. The weapon was exquisite, its hilt encrusted with a single sapphire that caught the light like a frozen tear. The case showed no signs of tampering, yet the dagger's orientation was indeed askew, as if it had been moved and replaced carelessly. "Most remarkable," Poirot murmured, his voice low. "Your observation, Hastings. It is most significant. A dagger moved, yet not stolen. This suggests hesitation, perhaps, or a plan interrupted." Hastings beamed, pleased to have contributed. "Well, I'm glad I noticed it. But what does it mean, Poirot? Another theft gone wrong?" "None, my friend," Poirot said, his gaze distant. "It means the thief is growing careless or bold. This dagger, it is not as valuable as the chalice, nor as sentimental as the statuette. Yet its disturbance, it speaks to me. We must learn more." As they left the armor gallery, they encountered Mr. Harold Finch, his arms laden with ledgers, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "Monsieur Poirot," he exclaimed, nearly dropping his load, "I've been reviewing the archives, as you asked. There's nothing more about that Guardian note, but I found a reference to the sapphire dagger. It was donated by the same anonymous benefactor as the chalice." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Etienne's, Monsieur Finch. This is most intriguing. The chalice, the statuette, and now the dagger, all connected, perhaps, by this mysterious benefactor. You have done well." Finch flushed, adjusting his spectacles. I try, sir. But the staff are in a tizzy over the statuette. Mrs. Pritchard is blaming everyone, and young Drake keeps muttering about resigning. Resigning. Poirot's tone was sharp. "Monsieur Drake, he feels the pressure. We shall speak with him." They found Lionel Drake in the staff room, polishing a brass candelabra with unnecessary vigor. His lanky frame was tense, his cufflinks, those curious gold pieces with the rose crest, glinting in the lamplight. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, startled. "I didn't see you there." "Pardonnez-moi, Monsieur Drake," Poirot said smoothly. "You seem troubled. Is it the theft of the statuette, or something more personal?" Drake's hand froze on the candelabra. "It sits dust, this place. Everyone sits on edge. Miss Vance keeps watching me, as if I been to blame. I only moved some labels in the East Gallery, I swear. And the Armor Gallery. Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. Did you visit there yesterday? Perhaps near the sapphire dagger? Drake's eyes widened. The dagger? No, I wasn't sit there. I stick to the paintings mostly. Why do you ask? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. A small matter, Monsieur Drake. But tell me these cufflinks of yours, they are most distinctive. A rose crest, none. It reminds me of a seal I have seen recently. Drake's face paled, and he tucked his hands behind his back. They said just old things, like I said, family trinkets. Bien sûr, Poirot said, but his eyes lingered on Drake's nervous posture. As they left the staff room, Poirot murmured to Hastings, "The young man, he hides something. The rose crest, it is no coincidence, I think." Hastings frowned. "You think Drake sits involved? You think Drake sits involved? And that he seems so harmless." Harmless Hastings. Poirot chuckled softly. The most dangerous hearts often wear the mask of innocence. Your observation of the dagger, it has opened a new path in this labyrinth. The chalice, the statuette, the dagger, all are pieces of a puzzle, and I suspect the anonymous benefactor is the key. As they returned to the main hall, Poirot's mind was alight with possibilities. Hastings' discovery had complicated the case, suggesting a deeper connection between the artifacts. The thief, he knew, was not merely after treasure. They were weaving a narrative, one that Poirot was determined to unravel before the next move was made. Chapter 7. The Shadow of the Past. The air in the Wallace Collection's basement archives was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a labyrinth of shelves groaning under the weight of ledgers and manuscripts. Hercule Poirot, his charcoal suit pristine despite the musty surroundings, stood beside a cluttered table, his pince-nez glinting as he pored over a yellowed document. Captain Hastings hovered nearby, his enthusiasm tempered by the oppressive silence of the room. The theft of the ivory statuette and the disturbed sapphire dagger had set Poirot's little grey cells ablaze, and now, with Mr. Harold Finch's help, he sought answers in the museum's past. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, his voice low but vibrant, "the past, it is like a shadow. It follows us unseen until the light of truth reveals its shape. This chalice, this statuette, this dagger, they are bound by history, and I suspect a history most scandalous." Finch, his spectacles fogged with nervous perspiration, handed Poirot another ledger. "This is the one, Monsieur Poirot," he stammered. "It sits from 1890, around the time the chalice and dagger were donated. There is a mention of the donor, but it sits vague." Poirot's eyes scanned a page, his fingers tracing the faded ink. The entry was brief. "Emerald Chalice and sapphire dagger, donated anonymously, 1890. Property of the late Viscount Ashbourne, bequeathed under condition of secrecy." A small sketch of a rose seal accompanied the note, identical to the one on the Guardian note Finch had found earlier. "Tiens," Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching. "Viscount Ashbourne. A name, at last. Monsieur Finch, what do you know of this man?" Finch adjusted his spectacles, his hands trembling. "Not much, I'm afraid. The Ashbourne family was prominent in the 19th century, wealthy, influential, with estates in Kent. But there was a scandal, I believe, around the 1880s. The Viscount died under questionable circumstances, and the family fell from grace. Their name is rarely mentioned now." Hastings, leaning over Poirot's shoulder, frowned. "A scandal, you say? What sort? Debts? A duel?" Finch hesitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting eavesdroppers. It was hushed up. Captain Hastings. Something about a betrayal, an affair, perhaps, or a crime. The details are murky, but the Ashbournes lost their title and lands soon after. The chalice and dagger were donated shortly before the Viscount's death. Poirot Sit's eyes gleamed. Poirot Sit's très intéressant. A scandal, a secret donation, and a rose seal. And now, a Sit guardian, Sit bound by blood. This is no coincidence, mes amis. The past reaches into the present, and the chalice is its conduit. Leaving the archives, Poirot and Hastings returned to the main hall, where Sir Reginald Wallace was overseeing preparations for heightened security around the chalice's case. The director's face was haggard, the strain of the thefts etched into his features. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "have you found anything? The staff are at their wits' end, and the patrons are whispering about our competence." "Patience, Sir Reginald," Poirot said, his tone calm but firm. "The truth, it reveals itself in time. But tell me, this Viscount Ashbourne, does his name stir any memories?" Sir Reginald Stid's eyes widened. "Ashbourne? Why, that's Stid's an old tale. He was a patron of the collection, long before my time. A tragic figure, ruined by some disgrace. I believe his daughter, Lady Cecilia, was the last of the line. She died in obscurity, poor soul." "Obscurité." Poirot's sister's voice was soft, but his mind was racing. "And no heirs, no descendants?" "None that I know of," Sir Reginald said. "The family was wiped out, socially and financially." As Sir Reginald excused himself, Poirot drew Hastings aside, his expression grave. "Mon cher, the Ashbourne scandal. It is the key. The chalice, the dagger, the statuette, they were all tied to this family, I am certain. And this rose seal. It is a clue to the guardian mentioned in the note. Yo." Hastings scratched his head. "But Poirot, if the Ashbournes are gone, who sits behind the threats? A ghost?" Poirot chuckled softly. "None, Hastings, not a ghost, but perhaps a shadow, a descendant, or someone claiming the Ashbourne legacy. We must learn more of this scandal." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miss Eleanor Vance, her black dress stark against the hall sipt's opulence. Her eyes, usually so composed, held a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot, I overheard you mention the Ashbournes. Why bring up that old story?" Poirot's gaze was piercing. "Mademoiselle, the past is never truly past. The chalice sits history. It is linked to the Ashbournes. None. You, as curator, must know something of this." Eleanor Stet's fingers brushed her silver locket, a gesture Poirot noted. "I know only what the records say," she replied coolly. "The chalice was theirs. Yes, but the scandal was before my time. Its Stet's irrelevant to the thefts." "Irrelevant?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Nothing is irrelevant, mademoiselle. And your locket, it is most striking. A family piece, perhaps." Eleanor Sit's hand dropped, her cheeks flushing. "A gift," she said curtly, "from my mother." Before Poirot could press further, Lionel Drake appeared, his lanky frame tense, his cufflinks glinting with the familiar rose crest. "Sir Reginald needs you, Miss Vance," he said, avoiding Poirot's gaze. "Something about the guard's sipped schedule." As Eleanor departed, Poirot's eyes lingered on Drake. "Mon ami," he murmured to Hastings, the rose crest. "It appears again. Young Drake, he is no mere assistant, I think. And Mademoiselle Vance, her locket, her unease. The shadow of the ash bones falls upon them both. Hastings frowned. You think they sit connected to the family? But how? Comment. Indeed, Poirot said, his voice low. The scandal. It is a wound that festers. Someone seeks to reclaim what was lost, or to avenge it. Tonight, Hastings, we must watch closely, for the thief will not rest, and the chalice, it calls to them. As they left the hall, the glint of the emerald chalice in its case seemed to pulse, a silent echo of a past that refused to stay buried. Chapter 8. A Midnight Intrusion. The moon hung low over London, its pale light barely penetrating the fog that once again cloaked Hertford House. Inside the Wallace collection, the galleries were silent, the grandeur of the day replaced by an eerie stillness. Hercule Poirot, however, was not asleep. Clad in a silk dressing gown, he sat in a small office Sir Reginald had provided, his eyes fixed on a map of the museum's layout. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, slumped in a chair nearby, stifling a yawn. Poirot, Hastings said, rubbing his eyes, do you really think it's necessary to stay up all night? The guards are patrolling, and the chalice is under lock and key. Mon cher Hastings, Poirot replied, his voice low but firm. The thief, they are bold. Statuettes theft, the dagger-seps disturbance. These are but preludes. Tonight, I sense, they will strike again, and Hercule Poirot will be ready. As if on cue, a faint clatter echoed from the direction of the main hall. Poirot, Sitz's head snapped up, his green eyes gleaming. Écoutez. The game. It begins. Come, Hastings. They hurried through the darkened corridors, Poirot's cane tapping softly, his movements swift despite his fastidious appearance. The main hall loomed ahead, the Emerald Chalice's case glowing faintly under a single spotlight. One of the guards, a burly man named Jenkins, stood frozen, his lantern trembling as he pointed to a side door leading to the courtyard. Mr. Poirot, Jenkins whispered, his voice hoarse. I heard it, a scraping like someone forcing the lock. I didn't dare leave the chalice. Bien fait, Monsieur Jenkins, Poirot said, his tone calm but urgent. Remain here, Hastings, with me. They approached the side door, where a faint scratch marked the lock, eerily similar to the one on the chalice-Sitz's case. Poirot knelt, his pince-nez glinting as he examined the door. Mon Dieu! The same hand, I think. The thief. They are impatient tonight. Hastings, gripping his service revolver, peered into the courtyard. The fog was thick, but a shadow moved briefly near the outer gate, a cloaked figure too swift to identify. There, Hastings hissed. They sit getting away. None, Hastings, Poirot said, grabbing his arm. We do not chase shadows. We return to the chalice. For this intrusion, it may be a diversion. They hurried back to the main hall, where Jenkins stood rigid, his eyes wide. It's still here, sir, he said, gesturing to the chalice's case. But Poirot's gaze was drawn to a nearby display, a silver candelabrum, one of a pair, now missing its twin. Sacre bleu, Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching. Another theft, under our very noses, the candelabrum. It is no coincidence. The thief, they mock us. As Jenkins raised the alarm, Sir Reginald arrived, his nightshirt hastily tucked into trousers, his face pale. Monsieur Poirot, what's happened? Another theft? Oui, Sir Reginald, Poirot said, his voice grim. A candelabrum, taken from this very hall. The intruder attempted the side door, but I suspect it was to draw the guardship's attention. The chalice, It remains, but the thief grows bolder. Miss Eleanor Vance appeared, her hair loose, a shawl thrown over her nightdress. "This is intolerable!" she snapped, her eyes flashing. First the statuette, now this. The collection is becoming a laughing-stock. "Calm, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his gaze lingering on her locket, which glinted in the lamplight. "The thief, they are close. Tell me, you were in your quarters, oui? You heard nothing?" Eleanor Set's hand touched her locket, a gesture Poirot noted. "Nothing until the alarm. My room is on the other side of the house." Mrs. Agnes Pritchard stormed in next, her severe bun askew. "What now? Another of my restorations gone? I told you, Sir Reginald, we need more guards." "Madam, your passion is admirable," Poirot said, his tone soothing. "But tell me, this candelabrum, it was from the Ashbourne donation?" "None." Mrs. Pritchard blinked, caught off guard. "Well, yes, I believe so. It was part of the 1890 bequest. How did you know?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Hercule Poirot knows many things, and now we have another thread to the Ashbourne tapestry. Liam Drake appeared last, his lanky frame shivering in a thin coat, his rose-crested cufflinks catching the light. "I heard the commotion," he stammered. "I was in the staff quarters, checking the inventory lists. I didn't see anything, I swear." "Bien sûr, Monsieur Drake," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Yet you are always near when trouble strikes." "None." Drake flushed, his hands fidgeting. "I stopped just doing my job, Mr. Poirot." As the staff dispersed to assist the guards, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, the pattern emerges, the statuette, the dagger, the candelabrum, all tied to the Ashbourne bequest. The thief, they are not random. They seek to reclaim, or perhaps to destroy, the legacy of that family." Hastings frowned. "But why steal a candelabrum? Its studs not as valuable as the chalice." "Value, Hastings, is not always in pounds," Poirot said, his voice low. "The candelabrum, like the statuette, is a message. The thief tells us they can strike at will, even under guard, but the chalice, they save it for last, I think." As they returned to the office, Poirot's mind was alight. The rose crest, the Ashbourne scandal, the locket, the cufflinks, each was a piece of the puzzle. The midnight intrusion had nearly succeeded, but Poirot had prevented disaster. Yet he knew the thief would not stop, and the chalice, gleaming in its case, seemed to beckon them closer. Chapter 9. The Patron Sits Secret. The morning sun bathed Hertford House in a golden glow, but the warmth did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that now permeated the Wallace collection. The midnight intrusion and the theft of the Ashbourne candelabrum had left the staff on edge, and Hercule Poirot, seated in Sir Reginald Wallace's office, was more determined than ever to unravel the threads of the conspiracy. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, his honest face creased with worry, as he recounted the previous night's events. "Dash it all, Poirot," Hastings said, pacing. "The thief slipped right through our fingers. That candelabrum business, it sits as if they were taunting us. But why not take the chalice and be done with it?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed, his fingers steepled before him. "Mon cher Hastings, the chalice, it is the prize, but the thief plays a deeper game. The statuette, the dagger, the candelabrum, all are steps in a dance, leading us to the heart of the Ashbourne mystery. And today, I think we shall learn more of the players." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Lady Beatrice Harrow, her sapphire blue gown replaced by a tailored grey suit, her sharp eyes assessing Poirot with a mix of curiosity and caution. Sir Reginald had summoned her at Poirot's request, citing her long-standing patronage and her interest in the Chalice's history. "Lady Harrow," Poirot said, rising with a courteous bow, "it is a pleasure to see you again. You are, I understand, a great admirer of the Emerald Chalice. Perhaps you can shed light on its significance?" Lady Harrow's smile was measured, her gloved hands folding neatly in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm flattered by your interest, but I'm merely a patron with a love for art. And the chalice is exquisite, of course. And its history, well, it's the stuff of novels, isn't it? Betrayals, curses, all that romantic nonsense." "Nonsense, madame." Poirot's tone was light, but his gaze was piercing. "Yet you were seen near the East Gallery before the statuette theft, and your knowledge of the chalice theft's past is most detailed. Tell me, what you know of the Ashbourne family?" Lady Harrow's smile faltered, her fingers tightening briefly on her handbag. "The Ashbournes, an old tragedy, nothing more. Viscount Ashbourne was a reckless man, ruined by his own folly, an affair, I believe, that cost him his reputation. His daughter Cecilia suffered most." "Why do you ask?" Poirotist's moustache twitched. "Because, madame, the chalice, the statuette, the dagger, the candelabrum, all were donated by the Ashbournes, and now they are targeted. A coincidence? None?" Lady Harrow's eyes narrowed. "You sipped, suggesting I have some connection to this. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, my interest in the collection is purely philanthropic." "Philanthropic? Oui," Poirot said, his voice velvet. "Yet philanthropy, it can mask other motives. I have learned that the Ashbourne scandal involved a betrayal, not just of love, but of trust. A secret, perhaps, tied to the chalice. You, madam, seem most curious about its history." Lady Harrow rose, her composure fraying. "This is absurd. I supported the collection for years. If you must know, my late husband Sid's family had dealings with the Ashbournes long ago. Business, nothing more. But I have no vendetta, no reason to steal." "Vendetta?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "I did not mention a vendetta, madame, yet you speak of one. It's interesting." Before Lady Harrow could respond, Miss Eleanor Vance entered, her face pale, her silver locket glinting at her throat. "Sir Reginald, the press are at the gates," she said, her voice tight. "They heard about the candelabrum. We being called negligent." Sir Reginald groaned, sinking into his chair. "This is a disaster. Monsieur Poirot, we must resolve this before the collection fet's reputation is ruined." "Patience, Sir Reginald," Poirot said, his eyes still on Lady Harrow. "Madame, you will forgive my questions, but the truth, it is like a painting. It requires careful study to reveal its depths. You may go, but we shall speak again." As Lady Harrow departed, her head held high, but her steps brisk, Hastings leaned closer to Poirot. "I say, Poirot, you rattled her. Do you think she sits the thief?" "None." "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "Not the thief, perhaps, but a piece of the puzzle. Her connection to the Ashbournes, it is personal, I think, and a vendetta, it burns long in the heart." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Harold Finch, clutching a crumpled letter. "Monsieur Poirot, I found this in the archives, slipped inside another ledger. It sits about. Lady Harrow." Poirot took the letter, his eyes scanning the elegant script, dated 1889. It was addressed to Viscount Ashbourne from a Margaret Harrow, Lady Harrow's mother-in-law, perhaps. The letter spoke of a debt unpaid, a promise broken, and a relic that held the key to their family's honour. The rose seal, now familiar, marked the bottom. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "The shadow of the Ashbournes grows darker. This Margaret Harrow, she was wronged by the Viscount, and now her daughter-in-law, Lady Beatrice, is here, circling the chalice. But why? Revenge, or something deeper?" Hastings frowned. "You think Lady Harrow sits after the chalice because of an old grudge, but what about Drake sits cufflinks, and Eleanor sits locket?" "Exactement, Hastings," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The cufflinks, the locket, the seal, they are threads in the same tapestry. Lady Harrow sips secret, it is but one piece. The thief, they move closer to the chalice, and we must be ready for their next strike." As they left the office, the glint of the Emerald Chalice in its case seemed to pulse with menace, a silent witness to a vendetta that had outlived its makers. Chapter 10. The Cryptic Cipher. The library of Hertford House, with its towering shelves and scent of aged leather, was a haven of quiet amid the storm engulfing the Wallace collection. Hercule Poirot sat at a polished oak table, his pince-nez perched on his nose, surrounded by a scattering of papers, the threatening notes, the Ashbourne ledger, and the letter from Margaret Harrow. Captain Hastings leaned against a bookcase, his brow furrowed, watching Poirot's meticulous fingers trace the lines of the first note. "The chalice will be claimed. Comply, or the Wallace legacy falls." "Mon cher Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low but vibrant, "these notes, they are not mere threats. They are a puzzle, a cipher hiding their true intent, and Hercule Poirot, he does not rest until the puzzle is solved." Hastings scratched his head. "A cipher, Poirot? It looks like plain English to me. Awfully menacing but straightforward." Poirot's moustache twitched with amusement. "Straightforward, Hastings? None. The mind behind these words is cunning. Observe the second note, from before the gala." He slid another paper forward, its elegant script reading, "The gala will be the stage. The chalice's fate is sealed." Poirot tapped the page. "The words, they are chosen with care. But it is not the words alone that speak, it is their arrangement." He produced a pencil and began underlining letters, the first letter of each word in the second note, T, G, Bubby, T, say, T, C, F, I. His eyes narrowed as he rearranged them, scribbling on a fresh sheet. "Regardez, Hastings. The first letters, when ordered, form a message. T, G, D, T, S, T, C, F, I, S. It is an anagram." Hastings peered over his shoulder, baffled. "An anagram? But what does it spell?" Poirot, Stick's pencil moved swiftly, rearranging the letters until a phrase emerged. "Trust is sist, gift, gift, bore." He leaned back, his green eyes gleaming. "Sist, magnifique. The cipher, it points to day. Sist, a person, perhaps, whose trust is a gift. And sist, day. Sist, initials, I think. Oh, but whose?" Hastings blinked. He could be Cecilia, the Ashbourne daughter. But she sits dead, isn't she? And where be? Wallace. Maybe. Sir Reginald? Peut-être, Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. But there is another C, set among us. Eleanor Vance, whose Christian name, I have learned, is Cecilia, and Theobald Vils, or perhaps Bartholomew, as in Lord Cresswell. Hastings gasped. "You think Eleanor sits the suspect?" Or Cresswell? But they sit so different. Eleanor sits all business, and Cresswell sits a pompous old buffer. Poirot chuckled softly. Mon ami, the heart hides many faces. Eleanor sits Locket. Her unease at the Ashbourne name, she may carry their legacy. And Cresswell, his glance at Lady Harrow, his quick dismissal of the curse, there is more to him. But we must test this cipher. Poirot summoned Sir Reginald and Eleanor Vance to the library, along with Mr. Harold Finch, whose archival discoveries had proven invaluable. As they gathered, Poirot held up the notes, his presence commanding the room. Mademoiselle Vance, Sir Reginald, Monsieur Finch, he began, the thief has left us a message, hidden in their threats. A cipher, pointing to one whose name begins with Thek, and another with initials Sequob. Ask you plainly, does this stir any recognition? Eleanor sits, hand went to her locket, her face paling. A cipher. I don't set know what you mean. My name is Eleanor, not Cecilia. Vraiment? Poirot, Stet's eyes were piercing. Yet I have heard it said your full name is Cecilia Eleanor Vance, and your locket, it bears a rose, much like the Ashbourne seal. A coincidence? None. Eleanor sits lips tightened. My locket is a family heirloom. I told you, it was my mother sits. I have no connection to the Ashbournes. Sir Reginald frowned, glancing at Eleanor. Monsieur Poirot, surely you sit not accusing Miss Vance. She sits been with us for years, utterly devoted. Devotion, Sir Reginald, can mask many motives, Poirot said, his voice smooth. And you, Monsieur Finch, have you found more in the archives about this deceit, or false? Finch fidget, his spectacles slipping. Well, I did find a reference to a Cecilia Ashbourne in an old letter addressed to a Seal DBBC, a business associate perhaps. It mentioned a debt tied to the chalice, but the details were vague. Poirot sits. Eyes sparkled. Sit, sir. A debt, a chalice, a rose seal, and now Mademoiselle Vance. Your name aligns with this Cecilia. Tell me, what is your true connection to the Ashbournes? Eleanor stood, her composure cracking. This is absurd. I send no thief, and I send not an Ashbourne. My mother was a governess, not a noblewoman. You send chasing shadows, Monsieur Poirot. Shadows, mademoiselle? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps, but shadows, they often hide the truth. We shall see. As Eleanor stormed out, Finch following nervously, Sir Reginald turned to Poirot. You think she's Stitz involved? Or is it Cresswell? His initials fit sit after all. Poirot nodded. Lord Cresswell. He is a possibility. His wealth, his connection to the collection, it makes him a figure of interest. I must speak with him again. Hastings, still puzzled, whispered, Poirot, you sit are not seriously suggesting Eleanor sits an Ashbourne heir, or that Cresswell sits behind this? Mon cher, Poirot said, folding the ciphered notes, I suggest nothing. I observe, I deduce. The cipher points to a C sit, and Eleanor sits reaction. It betrays her. But Cresswell, his arrogance, it hides something too. The chalice, it draws them all, and the next move will reveal the truth. As they left the library, the weight of the cipher hung over them, a cryptic clue pointing to a suspect Poirot had not yet fully unmasked. Chapter 11. Betrayal in the Inner Circle. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the marble floors of Hertford House, where the Wallace collection stood as a silent witness to the unfolding conspiracy. Hercule Poirot, his charcoal suit as impeccable as ever, paced the main hall, his cane tapping rhythmically. The decoded cipher, pointing to a K and Jean Dubois, had sharpened his focus on Eleanor Vance and Lord Cresswell, but a nagging unease gnawed at him. Captain Hastings, ever faithful, stood nearby, his brow creased with worry. "Poirot," Hastings said, glancing at the Chalice sitz case, now guarded by two burly men, "that cipher business is all well and good, but we sit no closer to catching the thief. And Eleanor, do you really think she sits an Ashbourne heir?" Poirot Sitz's green eyes flickered. "Mon cher Hastings, the truth, it is like a mosaic, each piece fits, but only when seen aright. Eleanor Sitz's reaction to the cipher, it was telling, yet there is another piece missing, and I fear it lies close, too close." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Harold Finch, his spectacles askew, a sheaf of papers clutched to his chest. "Monsieur Poirot," he exclaimed, his voice trembling, "I found something dreadful. You must see it at once." Poirot Sitz's moustache twitched, his gaze sharpening. "Calmez-vous, Monsieur Finch. What have you found?" Finch hesitated, glancing nervously at Hastings. It's about the Ashbourne donation. I was cross-referencing the ledgers, as you suggested, and I found a discrepancy. The candelabrum that was stolen, it wasn't listed in the original 1890 inventory. It was added later, in 1892, by someone on the staff. Poirot Sitz's eyes narrowed. "Tiens, added later. And who, Monsieur Finch, made this addition?" Finch Sitz's hands shook as he handed Poirot a faded document. "It was Sir Reginald Sitz's father, the previous director. But the signature, it's Sitz forged. I compared it to his other records. Someone used his name to alter the inventory." Poirot Sitz's face darkened, a rare crack in his composure. "Mon Dieu, a forgery. This suggests a betrayal within the very heart of the collection. Sir Reginald, he must be informed." They found Sir Reginald in his office, his face haggard from the strain of the thefts. "Monsieur Poirot," he said wearily, "the board is threatening to close the galleries if we don't resolve this. What now?" Poirot held up the document, his voice grave. "Sir Reginald, this ledger, it shows the candelabrum was added to the Ashbourne donation after 1890 under your father Sepp's name, but the signature, it is not his. Someone within the collection has tampered with the past." Sir Reginald Sitz's jaw dropped, his hands gripping the desk. "A forgery? Impossible. My father was meticulous. Who would do such a thing?" "Queer indeed," Poirot said, his tone icy. "Someone with access to the archives. Someone trusted. Monsieur Finch, you have worked here many years. None. You knew Sir Reginald Sepp's father." Finch paled, his spectacles slipping further. "I started as a junior clerk under him. Yes, but I never forge anything. I only found the discrepancy because you asked me to dig deeper." Poirot Sitz's gaze was unrelenting. "Vraiment? Yet you are always in the archives, Monsieur Finch, always finding these convenient clues, the Say Guardian Sitz's note, the Harrow letter, and now this, it is most curious. Your knack for discovery." Hastings gasped, his loyalty shaken. "Poirot, you can mean Finch, he been helping us all along." "Helping Hastings?" Poirot Sitz's voice was soft but cutting. or guiding us. Monsieur Finch, your initials they are HF, but in the cipher, sit could stand for another name, perhaps a pseudonym. Tell me, what is your full name? Finch Set's face crumpled, his hands trembling. Hallowed Bartholomew Finch, he stammered, but I swear I set 'em no thief, I only wanted to help. Poirot Sit's eyes widened, a spark of realization. Bartholomew, the tuber sitst of the cipher. It fits, and you, Monsieur Finch, have been at the heart of this from the beginning. The notes, the thefts, were they your doing, to distract from a greater scheme? Finch collapsed into a chair, his voice breaking. No, I found the notes. I reported them. But I knew about the Ashbournes. My father worked for them before their fall. He told me stories of a debt, a wrong tied to the chalice. I thought, if I helped you, I could clear my family's name. Poirot Sit's expression softened, but only slightly. Oh, mon ami, the truth, it is a fragile thing. You have hidden this connection, and now a forgery points to the past. Did you alter the ledger to protect the chalice, or to claim it? I didn't set, Finch cried, tears welling. I only wanted to understand why my father was so bitter about the Ashbournes. He said they ruined us, just as they were ruined. Sir Reginald stared stunned. Finch, you never told me this. Your father, he was involved with the Ashbournes. Poirot held up a hand. Assez, Monsieur Finch. You have betrayed my trust, but perhaps not the collection. Yet your silence, it has cost us. The thief, they used the Ashbourne legacy, and you have been their unwitting pawn. As Finch was escorted out, still protesting, Hastings turned to Poirot, shaken. I can still believe it, Poirot. Finch, of all people. Do you think he sits the thief? None. Hastings, Poirot said, his voice heavy. Not the thief, but a link in the chain. His duplicity, it stings, for I trusted his eagerness. But the cipher, the rose seal, the Ashbourne scandal, they point to another, someone who uses Finch Set's discoveries to their own end. As they left the office, the chalice's case gleamed in the hall, its emeralds mocking Poirot's shaken confidence. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also sharpened his resolve. The thief was close, and the next move would be decisive. Chapter 12. The Final Trap. The grand hall of Hertford House glowed softly under the chandeliers, its opulence a stark contrast to the tension that gripped the Wallace collection. Hercule Poirot stood near the Emerald Chalice's case, his charcoal suit impeccable, his green eyes alight with purpose. The betrayal of Harold Finch had shaken his confidence, but it had also steeled his resolve. The thief he knew was poised to strike again, and tonight Poirot would set a trap to unmask them. Captain Hastings stood beside him, his face a mix of excitement and apprehension. Poirot, Hastings whispered, glancing at the guarded case, "Are you sure this will work?" "The thief set's been one step ahead of us, every time." "Mon cher, Hastings," Poirot replied, his voice low but confident, "the thief, they are clever, but they are human. And humans, they make mistakes when tempted. Tonight, we shall offer a temptation they cannot resist." Poirot had devised a plan with Sir Reginald's reluctant approval. The museum would announce a temporary transfer of the Emerald Chalice to a secure vault, citing the recent thefts. The case would be left empty, but a hidden guard, Jenkins, the burly watchman, would conceal himself nearby, ready to act. Poirot, Hastings, and a select group of suspects would gather in the hall, ostensibly to discuss the collection's security, while Poirot watched for any telltale move. As evening fell, the hall filled with the key players: Sir Reginald, pale but resolute; Eleanor Vance, her silver locket gleaming against her black dress; Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, her severe bun tighter than ever; Lionel Drake, his rose-crested cufflinks glinting nervously; and Lord Bartholomew Cresswell, his florid face betraying irritation. Lady Beatrice Harrow was conspicuously absent, claiming a prior engagement, but Poirot had ensured she was informed of the Chalice's transfer. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice commanding the room, "the recent thefts, the statuette, the candelabrum, have cast a shadow over this noble collection. Tonight we protect the Emerald Chalice by moving it to safety. But first, I wish to hear your thoughts on these disturbances." Mrs. Pritchard snorted, her arms crossed. "It's about time. I said all along we need better locks. That statuette was my responsibility, and I won't have my work tarnished further." Eleanor Sett's eyes flickered to the empty case. "The chalice is safe now, I presume. This transfer seems sudden, Monsieur Poirot." "Soudain, mademoiselle?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic, perhaps, but necessary. "Monsieur Drake, you seem troubled. The chalice's safety, it concerns you." Drake's hands fidgeted, his cufflinks catching the light. "I just want this over with, sir. It's the collection's reputation is suffering, and I don't consider reputation is suffering. And I don't sit like being under suspicion." Lord Cresswell cleared his throat, his gold watch chain gleaming. "This is all a bit theatrical, Poirot. If you got a suspect, name them. I better things to do than play parlour games." "Patience, milord," Poirot said, his tone smooth. "The game, as you call it, is nearly won." As the group debated, Poirot's eyes darted to the shadows near the case. A faint creak sounded from the side door, the same one targeted during the midnight intrusion. Hastings tensed, but Poirot's hand on his arm kept him still. Moments later, a cloaked figure slipped into the hall, moving swiftly toward the empty case. Jenkins sprang from his hiding place, lantern raised, revealing the intruder's face, Lady Beatrice Harrow. "Lady Harrow," Sir Reginald gasped, as Jenkins seized her arm. "What is the meaning of this?" Lady Harrow struggled, her sapphire eyes blazing. "Unhand me. I was only checking the case. I heard the chalice was moved, and I feared for it." "Vraiment, madame." Poirot stepped forward, his voice icy. "You come in secret, cloaked, to fistic a sec, an empty case. No, you came to claim the chalice, believing it's still here. The trap, it has caught its prey." The group erupted in murmurs. Eleanor Sett's hand clutching her locket, Drake Sett's face paling. Lady Harrow Sett's composure cracked, her voice sharp. "This is absurd. I Sett's my patron, not a thief. I only wanted to ensure the chalice Sett's safety." "Safety?" Poirot Sett's eyes gleamed. "Or to settle an old score. Your family, the Harrows, were wronged by the Ashbournes, none. The letter from Margaret Harrow spoke of a debt, a relic tied to honour. You sought the chalice, not for wealth, but for vengeance." Lady Harrow Sett's lips trembled, but she held her ground. "You have no proof, Poirot. I done nothing but support this collection." "Pas de preuve." Poirot produced a small folded note from his pocket. The latest threat, found that morning, slipped under Sir Reginald's door. It read, "The chalice is mine. The past will be avenged." The handwriting matched the others, but the rose seal was unmistakable. "This seal, madame, it is the same as your family's crest, found in old correspondence, and your presence tonight, it betrays you." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Monsieur Poirot, are you saying Lady Harrow is behind the thefts, the statuette, the candelabrum?" Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Peut-être, mademoiselle, but the trap, it reveals only part of the truth. Lady Harrow, you are a conspirator, but are you the mastermind? That we shall learn tomorrow." As Jenkins escorted Lady Harrow to a secure room to await the police, the group dispersed, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion. Hastings whispered, "Poirot, you sep done it. But is she really the thief?" "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice heavy, "Lady Harrow is a piece of the puzzle, but the picture is not complete. The chalice remains, and the true conspirator, they watch from the shadows. Tomorrow, we shall unveil the truth." The empty case gleamed mockingly, its silence a challenge Poirot was ready to meet. Chapter 13. The Unveiling of the Truth. The grand hall of Hertford House was a stage set for revelation, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the gathered assembly. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his charcoal suit impeccable, his moustache perfectly curled, his green eyes alight with the fire of certainty. The Emerald Chalice gleamed in its case, no longer empty, its emeralds winking as if complicit in the drama about to unfold. Around him stood the key players, Sir Reginald Wallace, pale and tense, Eleanor Vance, her silver locket clutched tightly, Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, her severe bun quivering with indignation, Lionel Drake, his rose-crested cufflinks glinting nervously, Lord Bartholomew Cresswell, his florid face impatient, and Lady Beatrice Harrow, escorted by Jenkins, her sapphire eyes defiant despite her detention. Captain Hastings stood by Poirot's side, his honest face a mix of awe and anticipation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice resonant, commanding silence, "the conspiracy that has plagued the Wallace collection is at an end. The thefts, the threats, the cipher, they all lead to one truth, one mastermind. Tonight Hercule Poirot unveils the heart of this mystery." Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, you caught Lady Harrow in your trap. Is she the thief? Let Sitz have done with this." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Patience, Sir Reginald. Lady Harrow, she played a part, but the true architect of this plot is another. Let us begin with the facts." He paced slowly, his cane tapping rhythmically. The Emerald Chalice, the statuette, the dagger, the candelabrum, all were tied to the Ashbourne family, donated in 1890 after a scandal that ruined them. Threats warned of the chalice's theft, a cipher pointed to a key and would-be, and a forged ledger suggested betrayal within the collection. Each clue, it seemed, led to a different suspect. He turned to Lady Harrow. "Madame, your family was wronged by Viscount Ashbourne, a debt unpaid, a promise broken. You sought the chalice, believing it held proof of that betrayal. You crept into the hall last night, thinking it's still there." Lady Harrow sits, lips tightened. "I wanted justice, Poirot, not theft. My mother-in-law, Sit's letter, spoke of a secret in the chalice, a document proving the Ashbournes cheated us. I only wanted what was owed." "Justice," Poirot said softly, "yet you acted in secret, aiding the true thief Septa's plan. for you were not alone. He faced Lord Cresswell, whose face reddened. You, milord, your initials fit the cipher Stit Stobin Stow. Your wealth funds the collection, but your glances at Lady Harrow betrayed a shared purpose. Did you, too, seek the chalice Stit's secret? Cresswell blustered. This is nonsense. I sep no grudge against the Ashbournes. I only wanted the collection safe. Vraiment? Poirot sits, eyes narrowed. Yet you dismissed the curse too quickly, milord, as if you knew its truth. Poirot turned to Eleanor Vance, whose hand gripped her locket. Mademoiselle, your name, Cecilia Eleanor Vance, fits the cipher septus, C. Siptus. Your locket bears the Ashbourne rose. You denied any connection, yet your unease spoke volumes. Eleanor Sit's voice trembled. I told you, it sits my mother, sits locket. I sits no Ashbourne. Poirot nodded, then faced Lionel Drake, whose lanky frame shrank under his gaze. And you, Monsieur Drake, your cufflinks, also bearing the rose crest. You were near every theft, always nervous, always hiding. Drake stammered. They set just trinkets. I set 'em not a thief. None, Poirot said, his voice rising. But you are a pawn, like Lady Harrow, like Monsieur Finch, whose own Ashbourne connection blinded him to the truth. The mastermind, they used you all, weaving a tapestry of distraction to claim the chalice. He paused, turning to the chalice's case. The chalice. It holds a secret, not a curse, but a truth. I examined it this morning, with Sir Reginald's permission. Hidden in its base, beneath a false panel, was this. He produced a small sealed parchment, its wax bearing the rose crest, a confession, written by Viscount Ashbourne, admitting he falsified a debt to ruin the Harrow family, and implicating another, his steward, William Bartholomew. The room gasped. Hastings whispered, William Bartholomew, but who? Poirot's eyes locked on Mrs. Agnes Pritchard, who froze, her severe bun trembling. Madame Pritchard, your maiden name, it is Bartholomew. Non. Your father was William the steward who aided Ashbourne's betrayal. The ciphers were them. It was not Cresswell, but your father, you, madame, have orchestrated this conspiracy. Mrs. Pritchard's face contorted, her voice a hiss. You have no proof, Poirot. Au contraire, Poirot said, producing a final note, found in her restoration kit that morning. This, in your hand, details the thefts, meant to distract while you sought the confession to destroy it. You stole the statuette, moved the dagger, took the candelabrum, all to sow chaos, to reach the chalice unnoticed. Your father's shame drove you, to erase his guilt, to protect his name. Mrs. Pritchard collapsed into a chair, her defiance crumbling. He was disgraced, shunned, because of Ashbourne. That confession would have ruined us forever. I only wanted to bury it. Poirot Sit's voice softened. Madame, the past, it cannot be buried. The chalice Sit's secret is safe now, and justice will be served, not by theft, but by truth. As Jenkins led Mrs. Pritchard away, the group stood in stunned silence. Sir Reginald murmured, Monsieur Poirot, you saved the collection. Poirot bowed slightly. The little grey cells, they do not fail. But the true twist, mes amis, is this: the chalice Sit's secret was never a curse, but a mirror reflecting the greed and shame of those who sought it. As the group dispersed, Hastings clapped Poirot Sit's shoulder. By Jove, Poirot, you outdone yourself. A confession in the chalice. Who Sit have thought? Poirot smiled. his eyes twinkling. Mon ami, the heart of a mystery is always human, and Hercule Poirot, he sees the heart. Chapter 14. The Resolution at Dawn. The first light of dawn crept through the tall windows of Hertford House, bathing the grand hall of the Wallace collection in a soft rosy glow. The Emerald Chalice, now secure in its case, gleamed with a quiet dignity, its secrets laid bare. Hercule Poirot stood alone, his charcoal suit pristine, his cane resting lightly in his hand. The events of the previous night, the unmasking of Mrs. Agnes Pritchard as the mastermind behind the thefts, had restored calm to the museum, but Poirot's mind, ever active, turned to the deeper truths of the case. Captain Hastings joined him, his face weary but relieved, a cup of tea in hand. "By Jove, Poirot," Hastings said, settling into a chair near the chalice sift case. "You pulled it off again. Mrs. Pritchard, of all people. I'd never have guessed her, with her brusque manner and all that talk of protecting the collection." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Monsieur Hastings, the heart, it is a labyrinth." Madame Pritchard's loyalty to the collection was real, but it masked a deeper wound, the shame of her father, William Bartholomew, whose betrayal was etched in the chalice's confession. She sought to erase that shame, but in doing so, she wove a conspiracy that nearly undid her. Hastings sipped his tea, frowning. And Lady Harrow. She wasn't set the mastermind, but she played her part, didn't she? "Oui," Poirot said, his green eyes distant. "Lady Harrow, she was driven by her family's ancient grudge against the Ashbournes. Her attempt to steal the chalice was misguided, a quest for justice twisted by vengeance. Yet she was but a pawn, manipulated by Madame Pritchard's clever distractions, the statuette, the dagger, the candelabrum, all to keep us chasing shadows." The hall's doors opened, and Sir Reginald Wallace entered, his face lighter than it had been in days. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "I cannot thank you enough. The collection is safe, the chalice secure, and the press has been mollified with a story of enhanced security measures. You've saved our reputation." Poirot bowed slightly. "C'est mon plaisir, Sir Reginald, but the true victory is not in saving reputations, but in revealing truth. The chalice thit's confession, it has righted an old wrong. The Ashbourne scandal is no longer a shadow, it is history laid bare." Eleanor Vance approached, her silver locket glinting, her expression a mix of relief and guilt. "Monsieur Poirot, I owe you an apology. I was defensive about my locket, my name. My mother did work for the Ashbournes, as a governess to Cecilia. The locket was a gift from her, but I swear I had no part in the thefts." Poirot's gaze softened. "Mademoiselle, your secrecy, it was understandable, but it clouded the truth. Your locket, it bore the rose, but your heart, it was not with the conspirators. You are free of suspicion." Lionel Drake hovered nearby, his lanky frame less tense, his rose-crested cufflinks still catching the light. "Mr. Poirot," he said hesitantly, "I didn't know about Mrs. Pritchard's plan. My cufflinks, they were my father's, a distant cousin of the Ashbournes. I was ashamed to admit it, with all the scandal talk." "Mon jeune ami," Poirot said kindly, "the past, it is not your burden. You too were a pawn, but an innocent one. Your honesty now, it is enough." Lord Cresswell bustled in, his gold watch chain gleaming. "Poirot, You sit made me look a fool, suspecting me with that cipher nonsense, but I sit'll admit, you sit done a fine job. The collection owes you. Milord, Poirot said, his tone wry. The cipher, it pointed to many, but your innocence was clear. Your bluster, it is too genuine for a mastermind. Cresswell chuckled, mollified, and departed with Sir Reginald to discuss the collection sep's future. As the hall emptied, Hastings turned to Poirot. What about Finch? Poor chap, caught up in his own family sep's grudge. Poirot sighed, a rare note of melancholy in his voice. Monsieur Finch, his duplicity was born of loyalty to his father Sipta's memory, not malice. He will face no charges, but his heart it carries its own punishment. The Ashbourne legacy, it has wounded many. The dawn light grew stronger, illuminating the chalice's emeralds, or Poirot gazed at it, his voice soft. Mon ami, the chalice, it was never cursed, only coveted. Its secret, a confession of betrayal, drew out the greed, the vengeance, the shame of those who sought it. Yet in its revelation it has brought justice, not ruin. Hastings smiled. You sip a way of seeing the world, Poirot. Always the human side, eh? Toujours, Poirot said, his eyes twinkling. The little grey cells, they solve the puzzle, but it is the heart that tells the story. Come, Hastings, let us take breakfast. The day is new, and London, she awaits. As they left Hertford House, the Wallace collection stood serene, its treasures safe, its shadows dispelled by the dawn and by the brilliance of Hercule Poirot.